2, 3, 4.
Welcome everyone to Discover This, and welcome back. Well, today we got some history. Kind of a sad chapter in American history, World War II history. And that's the internment of the Japanese Americans in the United States. And we're going to visit one of the camps, one of the internment camps here. And this is Poston, Arizona. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the history of Poston, Arizona, and the camp that was here back in the early 1940s. On February 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which allowed the United States to forcibly relocate people of Japanese descent into 10 basically concentration camps, but called internment camps. About 120,000 people of Japanese descent were put into these camps. Japanese Americans were perceived to pose a security risk, and this order was one way to help mitigate that issue, or so they thought. The camps were primarily in the western U.S. in some very unforgiving territory. You can see by this map, the large black triangles show where the internment camps were. Now in Arizona, both internment camps were on Indian reservations. The Native Americans did not want them. They wanted nothing to do with this order. They took their issues to the Office of Indian Affairs, which is pre-Bureau of Indian Affairs, but to no avail. The Office of Indian Affairs sided with the federal government, and the camps were built on reservation land. The Poston camp, officially called the Colorado River Relocation Camp, was opened on May 8, 1942, after lots of construction to get things ready. It was located, and the memorial still is, on the Colorado River Indian Reservation. This was the largest of the 10 camps at 71,000 acres. The camp here was broken into 3 separate units, Units 1, 2, and 3, spread over about 3 miles. The peak population here was 17,814, which was about the most populous besides the Northern California camp, which is where the dissidents or troublemakers were sent. Most of the population here at Poston came from Los Angeles, Tulare, San Diego, Orange, Fresno, Imperial, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties. Many came directly to Poston. Some came via the assembly centers. The climate out here didn't make for good living conditions. The fast-paced building of the camp and the lack of supplies made things even more unbearable. The barracks were made from redwood, which shrunk more than expected, leaving cracks or open spaces throughout. Because of a large lumber shortage, adobe was used for newer buildings. The summer heat got upwards of 115 degrees, and winter cold was down to 35 degrees, so that was also unbearable for many. Outbreaks of disease were common, with 140 cases of tuberculosis here at this camp alone. The people assigned to this camp had jobs they could do, which didn't pay very well at all, if at all. Some worked the agricultural fields inside and outside of the camp, and there was also a camouflage net factory at this camp where they would make camouflage netting for the Army. At the height of production, they were producing almost 1 million feet of camouflage netting daily. But there were issues. The fire chief noted an accumulation of lint and burlap that created a fire hazard, and he threatened to shut the factory down. Also, many workers broke out in rashes due to the various dyes used in the burlap. The factory didn't even last a year due to those issues and others, including the wages. Poston was pretty isolated. However, the town of Parker, Arizona is just about 17 miles away. Some of the detainees would earn passes to go to town, as it were, but the town was not very inviting. Parker had a rather negative sentiment towards the Japanese Americans. Also, the staff at Poston was more diverse than most of the other camps, with a number of African Americans working here. They were teachers, nurses, and welfare and relocation workers. While these workers were mostly held in high regard by many of the inmates, some inmates harassed the African American workers and hurled racial slurs at them. Even in Parker, Arizona, the African American workers could only be served at one restaurant and one bar. All the rest of the establishments refused to serve them. There were schools here, and inmates created and participated in many recreational activities. Baseball was a big sport, not only in this camp, but in some of the others as well. There were more than a few baseball teams here, and they formed leagues, and game scores and game summaries were posted in the daily camp bulletin. Some of the male youth started a Boy Scouts chapter at this camp. There was even a murder here at this camp. A 24-year-old female was found stabbed 29 times in her barracks. Her 35-year-old ex-boyfriend was the main suspect, and he had threatened and stalked her for months before her murder. He was last seen fleeing into the desert, and search parties scoured the desert and the train station in Parker for him, but he was never found. The government started closing the camps down in 1945. Here at Poston, Units 2 and 3 were closed on September 29, 1945. Unit 1 was closed on November 28, 1945. In 1983, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians investigated whether the internment had been justified. The resulting report found little evidence of Japanese disloyalty and concluded that the internment had been a product of racism. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, in which the United States government officially apologized for the internment and authorized the payment of $20,000 each to former detainees who were still alive when this act was signed. That's roughly $52,000 in today's dollars. This act of legislation admitted that the government's actions were based on racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. By 1992, $1.6 billion had been distributed to former detainees. That's about $4.12 billion in today's money. That money was distributed to roughly 82,219 Japanese Americans who were incarcerated in these camps. Now out here is where the camps are located, again spread over about 3 miles. Those homes back there are newer, but in and around this area you can find slabs of foundations that are still left. But being that it's an Indian reservation, they really don't want you straying too far from this memorial, so you really can't go snooping around and checking them out. But there's some slabs in the middle area of those homes there, and then over near the elementary school there's still some slabs. And if you get on Google Earth or Google Street View and do the aerial, you can see them out here, but again, they pretty much want you just staying here on the memorial property. And surrounding the memorial, they've placed a bunch of memorial bricks that different families have purchased and had put here. People who had family members that were incarcerated in this camp, or possibly other camps, or maybe one of the minor camps. But it's a very nice memorial. Again, no buildings and things like Manzanar, but right here along the Ehrenberg-Parker Highway, you can stop and check it out. It's right next to the fire station. But well worth a stop if you're anywhere in the area. Just south of Parker, Arizona, north of Ehrenberg, north of the I-10 at the Ehrenberg exit. So that's going to do it, ladies and gentlemen, for this story and this little bit of history, American history, that you don't read about in the school history books anyway, really. So I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Please come visit this memorial if you get a chance, if you're in the Poston, Arizona area, just north of Ehrenberg and south of Parker along the Colorado River. Or you can try and visit some of the other camps. Manzanar is always the big one, right? That's the one that's been kept up. So anyway, thank you again for watching, and we will see you on the next Discover This.